Namaste. So I want to talk more about the Vivartha-vāda. The Vivartha-vāda is very important because it's the stage of self-realization that leads to final enlightenment. Some people want to simply jump up to Vivartha-vāda and begin meditation and Rāja-yoga before their preliminaries are mature. This is always a mistake. The object of Vivartha-vāda is to realize emptiness, śūnyā. And if the mind is contacted with emptiness before it's fully purified, then terror is the result. And this happens a lot, actually, in bad drug trips. Somebody will get high on LSD or something, and they will contact this emptiness, and basically they go mad. They can't handle it. This dissolution of the personality, the ego death. I know a lot has been made of this ego death, but ego death is not ego death unless the ego is actually dissolved. If one clings to the ego, then one experiences terror. So, what is the cure for this? That the preliminary stages of karma yoga, which is the generation of good karma, punya, and bhakti yoga, which is spontaneous love for God in any form, these have to be brought to maturity, completion, just as the stage of Vivartha-vāda has to be brought to completion in emptiness. Bhakti has to be brought to completion in prema, and karma yoga stage has to be brought to completion in adequate punya to attain enlightenment. It's just like having a bank account. You know, if you want to purchase something very expensive, let's say a house, God only deals in cash, by the way. No credit, sorry. You have to have the bank balance to plunk down the cash to buy this very expensive purchase. You want to buy a Picasso painting? Sotheby's is not going to take your credit card. They want cash. So, in the same way, if you want to realize emptiness, then you have to have the punya and the prema required to keep you from going insane. This is a fact. So now, what is this emptiness? Well, how can you talk about something that doesn't exist? It's very difficult. But there's a way around it. We have a series called Apophatic Anti-Fragility, which covers this point in a kind of elliptical way. But I'd like to cover it more directly in this series. Let's say you're looking at a tree. Now, what is the difference between the tree and not tree? There's a boundary, isn't there? You see the tree standing in the forest, and you kind of draw a line around it and say, this is the tree, inside this line is the tree, outside is the not tree. Isn't it? We all do this. And the same is true of any object. When we perceive it, first of all, our eyes don't recognize objects. Our eyes only see colors and shapes. Then our mind gets a hold of this and imagines a boundary around the object. That this is a table and this is not table. This is a tree and this is not the tree. So what happens, though, if we back off a little bit And instead of looking at the tree, now we're looking at the forest. Let's say the forest covers the whole side of a mountain. It's a big forest. So now where's the boundary? The boundary is around the whole forest, right? But wait a minute. What happened to the boundary around the tree? It's gone, right? This is emptiness. We imagine the boundaries between this and that. We project this imagination onto our vision of the world. And then we say, this is this is that, this is that, and this is not that. But these are all basically imagination. If we look at our so-called boundaries, we'll find that actually there's no sharp edge. There's no really clear delineation between one object and another. If you say, well, the boundary of the tree is the leaves and branches, the surface. Well, that's a good approximation, a good macroscopic approximation. But if we look microscopically, we'll see actually the whole time. For example, the leaves. The leaves have little hairs, ciliae, that stick up in the air. And they absorb and also emit water and air. The leaves take in sunlight and they use it to transform by means of chlorophyll, to transform their food into energy. You see, without the sunlight, water and air, the tree can't exist. So where is the boundary of the tree? See? If you try to cut the tree off from the water, air, and sunlight around it, it will die. It won't be a tree anymore. So where is this boundary exactly? You see, the more you look into it, and don't get me started about quantum mechanics, that the more you look into this idea of boundary, the harder it is to actually say, this is where the boundary is. So boundaries are non-existent. They're empty. And if you read Buddha's Mula-pariyaya Sutta, in fact, I think I'll put a link in the video description to the Mula-pariyaya Sutta because it's so amazingly insightful. Buddha shows how we create the idea of I. Basically, every perception that comes in, let's say I'm looking at a table. My eyes only see some shapes and colors. But my mind takes these impressions and says, that's a table. I have known many tables before. And this looks just like a table. And then we add on top of that the idea of I. So the idea of table and the idea that I am seeing this table is something that we add on top of the original perception. We imagine that this is a table. We imagine the boundaries around the table, between the table and not the table. And then we imagine that I am seeing this table. I am seeing so many things. Yes, I am knowing. But actually, all this I business is simply imagination. If you ask someone, show me your I. Show me, your ego, your identity. Who are you? Show me. They can't find anything. The most they can do is point to the body. Say, this is me. No, this is not you. What happens when you go to sleep at night? The body disappears. In fact, the whole world disappears. And you find yourself in a different body, in a different world, which has different rules and laws, different activities, a different identity, and all kinds of crazy things can happen in the dream world. And then that world disappears, and you find yourself in deep sleep where there's nothing. Emptiness. Śūnyā. This is called Suśupti. Suśupti is the third state of consciousness. See? So you have Jagrat, waking consciousness, then Svapna, dream consciousness, and Suśupti, deep sleep consciousness, where one is not aware of anything. One is certainly still aware. And the proof of that is when we wake up in the morning, we say, I had a good sleep. I had a good rest last night. How do you know? Well, you were aware. We need this. If we don't get deep sleep, gradually we lose our sanity and our health as well. This has been proven by sleep researchers. So, try to understand. We need emptiness. We need śūnyā. We need deep sleep. But the reason we don't remember it is that we have semantic blockage in the brain against emptiness. Why? Because we lose our identity. We lose the ability to project this concept of I. We lose the ability to draw boundaries around things. That's why dreams are so crazy. There's less boundaries. So things that could never happen in the Jagrat consciousness happen all the time in dream consciousness. In Svapna. And in Suśupti, nothing happens at all, which is wonderful. Now, we can experience Suśupti in samadhi. And we should, because it's very, very healing. It's very blissful. And it's a necessary ingredient of self-realization. So the whole sadhana in Vivartha-vāda, just like the consciousness cultivated in Dvaita-vāda is the Jagrat consciousness, being in the world. The consciousness cultivated in the Dvaita-advaita or Viśuddhi-cakra consciousness is Svapna, the dream. And similarly, in Vivartha-vāda, the consciousness that's cultivated is Suśupti, emptiness. One should enter this emptiness with full awareness and realize that it's not terrible at all. It's not scary at all. It's actually the supreme refuge, because there's no troubles, there's no suffering, there's no any kind of denigration that happens in material life. There's no competition. See? There's no degradation. There's no birth and death. No karma. No action. No objects. Nothing. And when one is in this consciousness, then something very special can happen. And that's called enlightenment. So enlightenment is not something you can do. Enlightenment is something that happens when you have sufficient qualifications. And that qualification means that all these false, imaginary concepts like I and mine boundaries and so on, have to be removed from the mind. You cannot find a boundary to consciousness. I mean, we say there's Jagrat and Svapna and Suśupti, consciousness. But the fundamental awareness, the non-dual, subjective awareness behind each of these is the same. Actually, only the objects differ. In Jagrat, the objects are the objects of the senses. In Svapna, the objects are the thoughts in the mind. And in Suśupti, there is no object. And the same with Samadhi, there's no object in the mind. So when one comes to full realization of the fundamental objectless awareness, this is called the fourth state of consciousness, turiya. See? Or as Ramana used to call it, I. And when one gives up even the possibility of adding consciousness to awareness, then it becomes tatituriya, atituriya, even beyond turiya. So this is the state of Shivam. Shivam means, it's described in the Ribhu Gita as a solid block of being. There is only being, there's no non-being. Everything is there in potential, but nothing is there in actualization. I know, if you haven't experienced this is all gibberish, right? Sounds like hocus pocus. But to one who has experience of these things, it's perfectly clear what I'm talking about. Right, Michael? So one should perform the sadhana of Vivartha-vāda after developing the proper qualifications, adhikara, by completing the sadhana of the first two stages, Dvaita-vāda and Viśuddhi-cakra. So one who engages in this form of contemplation is a candidate for final enlightenment. And these are the ripe sadhus. And these are the ones that all the great teachers, like Shankaracharya, Ramana Maharshi, and so on, were actually addressing. Because they're the ones who can really attain enlightenment in this very lifetime. Aum Tat Sat. Aum Harihi Aum.